Um, Welcome everyone. My name is Greg Freeman. I'm the CEO of Data Literacy Academy. I'm joined by Ylan, who I will let introduce himself in a moment. And we're going to spend today just talking about some of the successes that Ylan and Blue Cross Blue Shield North Dakota have had when deploying a data and AI literacy program across the organization, some of the potential gotchas that they've seen that they would do the same again or they do differently again, depending on what they were hoping to achieve and what they were expecting, and really getting a good feel for how Ylan views the people side of the data and AI strategy. And I think from my side, just to give some early thoughts on this, it's really interesting to work with someone like Ylan, who is such a thought leader and expert in the more technical sides of data and is definitely considered in the United States a thought leader within the AI space and is really at the forefront of that conversation, but also has such a high value put on the people and culture side of data and AI, because we all know that there's a perception that a lot of highly technical, highly proficient data professionals think about data as a technical subject and something that really is about technology and skills and code and all those types of things. Whereas from the first day I ever met Ylan, it was really all about, I understand that we've got to do all the technology and process and AI pieces, but these won't work if we don't bring the people on the journey. And that was a breath of fresh air, personally, when we first started having those conversations. And that belief system has made the program at Blue Cross Blue Shield North Dakota so successful as a result. So that's my first point of emphasis. Ylan, would you like to introduce yourself? And then we'll get going with the first questions, and we'll have a nice flowing conversation as we go through the next kind of 45 minutes to an hour.
Sure. Yeah, great to be here, Greg. Ylan Kazi, I'm the Chief Data and AI Officer for Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota. Our company is based in Fargo, North Dakota, and we serve the state market of around 350,000 members. I lead our enterprise data and analytics solutions team, our data governance steering committee, and I'm one of the co-chairs for our AI steering committee. So yeah, great to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. So, um, insurance, health insurance, typically considered, I think with the experience we've had, insurance firms are a little bit ahead of the curve, actually, in a really positive way. I think pricing and large consumer data sets have been at the core of businesses like yours for a while. So we do see that insurance is fairly forward thinking in this space. But I guess my first question is, what did things look like at Blue Cross Blue Shield North Dakota when you first realized you needed a better approach to data literacy and culture? What was the ground zero experience for you, your data colleagues, and the wider business colleagues that made you say, right, this is the right time. It looks right to get going now?
Yeah, so when I joined the organization almost 3 years ago now, the senior leadership team had really come to the conclusion that they wanted to take their data and analytics to the next level. So my role was newly created. A few of the roles on my leadership team were newly created. And I think what was a really helpful start was they had already had that realization. I didn't have to come in and help build a lot of that consensus and collaboration. They already had their minds focused on wanting to move that to the next level. So that was a great start with just the culture and the leadership of the organization. As I kind of did my listening tour and really got to know the team and the organization, I saw just a few key things. And I'll kind of preface these with we see these in a lot of organizations, and even as I talk with my peers as they join organizations, these are very common. So one of them was just a huge focus on the volume of deliverables, whether those were reports, dashboards, I would say some insights, some analytics. It was very very reporting heavy. So our team would take in different data requests, fulfill them, send them back to the stakeholder. I think in many cases it almost felt transactional as well. So that was a big challenge because yes, you can measure volume, but you really want to move and start measuring value instead and focus on, what will actually drive the business forward. So I think that was a really big one. Um, I heard a lot about kind of the quote unquote data issues, and I think as data leaders, when you hear that, it can mean one of probably 50 different things. And so I made sure to really find out, okay, what type of data issues were there? And in some cases there were data quality issues. We knew we needed to improve overall data quality. But what surprised me is that in a lot of cases, the dreaded data issues was a lack of understanding of how to interpret data and analytics. There were also challenges with our stakeholders being able to ask us what they actually needed. So they would ask us, can you send me the data? Can you send me this report? But in many cases, they didn't need that. They needed the insights or they needed recommendations on where to take action. And there was a very large degree of variability with data literacy within the organization. Um, and then I would say the last piece of it was um, joining the team. There were a lot of fire drills every day, a lot of things that we needed to do last minute. And so we really created a better structure in helping our stakeholders plan their work and then also prioritize it accordingly. And that helped take the team from, just kind of fulfilling things day in and day out to being more strategic and being able to allocate more of that time towards the more strategic objectives that would not just help our business, but also help the members that we serve.
Got you. And I'm going to kind of pick up on a couple of those things, I think, based on what we see both with Blue Cross, Blue Shield, North Dakota, but also elsewhere. I think you're probably you're singing from the same hymn sheet that a lot of the people listening and watching will be singing from, I think. And it's really interesting that you've noticed there what we would describe actually as the data and AI literacy problem, which is that you've got a business side who don't necessarily know what they want or why they want it, but also more importantly, actually how to want it and how to ask for the right things. And then you've got a data team who are acting as a customer service function for reports and dashboards and not really able to communicate back why that would or wouldn't be valuable and whether that is or isn't the right solution. So just before I ask you about the first point you made, which is around leadership and leadership buy-in. What have you seen as your programs evolved in terms of kind of closing that two-sided knowledge gap between the parts of the organization and closing that two-sided communication gap between data and the business? What have you seen of some of the upsides of that, and how's that changed and evolved, and what pains has it fixed since you've really started to invest in data and AI literacy on both sides?
Yeah, I would say a few things come to mind. One of them is around just efficiency in general. So, I'll give a more tangible example. In the past, our team would be asked to provide a report. That report would be fulfilled, maybe it took a few days or a few weeks. That would go back to the business leader or the stakeholder team, and it wouldn't necessarily hit the mark the first time. So then we would have to kind of take in additional feedback, redo it, add things, remove things, send it back. And it was a pretty drawn out process in many cases. A part of that was our data quality, a part of that was, being able to build better relationships. But the other part of that was our stakeholders being able to ask for exactly what it is that they needed and kind of focusing on what were the business problems they were trying to solve. So as we went through our data literacy journey and we've really continued on it, we get much better questions that are asked by our business stakeholders, and there's a much greater focus on what are the business problems that they are trying to solve, and then how does our team help them with the appropriate analytic solution. So we've seen just a great improvement overall in how that works. I would say the other piece, and this one's maybe a little bit more challenging to quantify, the caliber of questions that get asked in meetings have really leveled up. So where it used to be more anecdotal evidence, or maybe not as many data-driven decisions. Now I've sat in some of these meetings where someone will ask, okay, what's the statistical significance of this? And that kind of, the first time I heard that, it took me out of left field because I wasn't used to hearing that. But I think there's a benefit to being able to use a standardized language and focusing first on what does the data show us before we start to move our strategy forward, and before we start to make many of these decisions.
Yeah, that's absolutely massive, right? I think we had Helen Blakey, who's the Chief Data Officer at Aston University in the UK. Shout out to Helen. She's just been nominated for the Data IQ Award for Best Data Academy. And she said the thing that really took her aback almost in terms of seeing the benefits in real time was that all of a sudden she wasn't the person bringing data to meetings. Her senior leaders were actually providing the data themselves and presenting it in an effective way. And those are the kind of tangible things that you can almost like feel and taste on a day-to-day basis. And it sounds like that's one for you as well, where you're all of a sudden he, hearing the right language, hearing the right questions, all those types of things. So with that in mind, and you obviously get exposed to a lot of leadership conversations, how did you go about at first driving some of that appetite you already had from the leaders, but actually moving them to a point where they were supportive of a program like this and they were buying into more than technology is a silver bullet, which is what we always hear. We'll just put more money into technology. What did you do to transition them from, yep, we've invested in the technology and the right data professionals, but now we need to invest in literacy, culture, and the wider business support?
Yeah, we had a lot of foundational building that we had to do when it came to our team, our data infrastructure, the way that we work with stakeholders. There were quite a few different parts that we had to focus on. And I think the way that we were able to not only emphasize the importance of data literacy, but also how it would help our business, was showing it as a part of that broader vision. So what we didn't do is just come to the table and say, we need data literacy, let's fund it, let's move it forward. It was showing that it was a very important foundational component of being able to evolve as an organization, how we use data, how we better help our members. So really having that overarching vision around it. I would say the other piece was just being very, very open and honest about the things that we did well, and areas of improvement. And not just from our business stakeholders, but I think even internally within our data team. I found that by coming forward first and really modeling that behavior of, here is what we do well as a data team, here are the areas of opportunity, that made our business leaders more open in, what were their strengths, what were their opportunities, and we could have a more just a better, richer dialogue, versus kind of only focusing on the amazing things we were doing, and maybe not focusing on the areas of opportunity, but ensuring that it really was a judgment-free zone and we were all working better together on helping each other, versus pointing out where maybe teams were not performing as well, or just had these massive opportunities. So that was very helpful, just that culture with our executive leadership team. Very, very strong culture, very open, and very honest.
This maybe is a little bit left field based on what you've just said, but I think what you've just described there, that almost like data professionals having to leave their ego at the door and say that this isn't just a business side problem, like it's everybody's problem, and we're
Mhm.
part of it too. How did you, because you've got a decent sized data team of people who are all their own people, what types of conversations did you have with your own team about how they should enable and engage with the organization to leave that ego at the door and kind of understand that they're part of it? What did that relationship look like with your own data professionals to support
Mhm.
those conversations and progress?
With our data professionals, it was really asking the question of what is in our control. So when something doesn't go according to plan, or when we would when we would have a deliverable that would just completely miss the mark, what elements of that are in our control and how do we do better next time? So it's really focusing on how do we clean up our own shop first before we start looking externally to our team and working with some of the other business teams. So really just that focus on what's within our control. I think the other piece was just being very open about what do data teams do well, where do they traditionally struggle, and then kind of vice versa. What do business teams do well, and where do they traditionally struggle? And one of the things that as a data team and as a business team that we're both guilty of is kind of oversimplification of functions. So a good example of that is when we're working with business stakeholders, like, oh, just take it to the data team. So you think of this data team as like this amorphous blob, when in actuality, we all know that there are, there are data engineers, there are data analysts, data scientists. There are many different types of data roles, and they do very different things. But we as data teams also oversimplify business teams because we'll say the business, but we all know that marketing is very different than sales or finance or operations. And so I think just, talking about these things openly that we normally just keep under the surface, nobody can hide anymore, right? And we're very open and maybe some of the bias that we may bring as we work with these teams, that made people a lot more comfortable. And at the end of the day, we could almost laugh at it. Like we know where we know where our biases are. We know where we're going to struggle. How do we focus on managing around those and really focusing on the relationship at hand? I found was very important.
Absolutely love that. I mean, like you know from our lens on education and what we teach in our classes that this common language and part of that common language for the business people is understanding what is the difference between a data engineer and a data analyst, not because they're ever going to be one of those things themselves, but who do they take their problem to? Because if they've got business questions to answer and they take it to a data engineer, they're going to be like, why are you here? I don't understand.
Mhm.
Like, do you got a data set you need? I can help. And that obviously creates a level of friction straight away, not understanding what each other does. But I think to acknowledge with your own people that there's that level of nuance and complexity on the other side, and therefore they can't just treat everyone the same. That level of humility, I think, is really, really powerful. So appreciate you sharing that with your program. And I think one of the lovely things about the BCBS ND program has been the horizontal nature of it. Of course, you started early doors with a keen focus on your key strategic cohort in kind of marketing, sales, and customer. But wonderfully now, it's incredibly horizontal across the organization. And this goes with a question that's been asked in the chat by one of the guests, but also we were going to talk about this anyway. What was the thinking as you've evolved behind including people from all areas of Blue Cross, and making sure that we are making data, AI, and literacy a horizontal solution, not just focusing on small groups of people? I think something we commonly see is, oh, if we get the execs on board and get them to be data literate, we'll solve every problem. Not the case. It's a frontline problem in truth, in our experience, and the masses, the silent majority, are your biggest challenge. So, like, what was
Mhm.
it that's made you evolve the program to cover all bases and pull people in from all different teams and departments?
Yeah, with our senior leadership team and our board, it was really essential to have their support. Just very, very critical. If you don't have senior leadership support, you're really not going to go too far. And our CEO has just been an amazing champion of all things data. Data was our top priority a few years ago. So really a focus within the entire organization to prioritize data initiatives. So that was a great start. As we continued, though, we knew that we would have to get our middle management on board, and in particular our frontline employees. Without that critical mass, many of them may kind of wait it out and see, oh, is this just the new flavor of the year, and it'll be something next time. So we're really not going to get too engaged or too involved. And I think a big part of how we were able to accelerate that was by just identifying who were those individuals within these teams that were excited. So those initial kind of champions that we could engage on that had been a part of the initial trainings we had done. And then how could we create kind of a core initiative team that would form a really strong base? So that was very helpful because we included people from all different divisions that we had. And that also helped us from a kind of a change management aspect, as well as ensuring that it wasn't just me or my data leaders emphasizing and reinforcing, but a huge cross section of individuals within each of these organizations. So that was very helpful. And then I think we also had our aha moment when we had our on-site where I think we had invited, probably a few dozen people, and we had a lot more actually show up, which was really cool to see. But really just kind of voicing where were they struggling, where were these fears, and showing that it's not a bad thing if you ask a very rudimentary question. Now you've asked it, and here's how we can help you. And I think just that kind of change of being hesitant or being fearful to, oh, I'm actually learning, and in order to learn, you have to make mistakes. You have to ask, maybe the easy questions, but it will help you in your role, and it will help the company and the members that we serve.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting word you've used there, the word fear. And I think people shy away from this concept that their business partners might be scared of data and might not want to talk about it. But for me, as somebody who spends all their time in this space, it's just the biggest blind spot amongst data professionals at the moment that some people may not want to be involved in data. They may not understand why they'd use it. They may be fearful of things that underpin data, like maths and stats and all those types of things. Um, and as you go through these programs, and I'm going to come to one of the questions that's been asked anonymously. I don't know what anonymous attendee it is, but it's probably someone who's not signed in to Zoom. As you're upskilling people throughout the org and they're getting greater awareness of their own fears or their own concerns and need for safe spaces, how is that changing how the data team works with them, and what adaptations has that awareness from your data professionals who work with these people every day, some, many across the world, expecting that the conversation should flow perfectly and nobody is
Mhm.
going to be scared of it? How's that changed the way that they work with their colleagues? And how have you seen that benefit the business as well?
I'll give two different perspectives on this one. The first perspective I'll give just how we interpret it from a data team, from a data side. Um, I think it's very helpful as our stakeholders improve their data literacy, because a big part of it is, and I think in many cases, when our team is bringing in data, doing the analytics, there's almost this mindset of, well, you're using all this technology, isn't it just automated? Do you kind of just, press a button and, you know, data comes in and magic comes out of it, right? And I'm definitely oversimplifying, but I think there can still be that mentality of how hard can it actually be? And I think by understanding more about data literacy and even about the core data within their various divisions, there's kind of a newfound respect on, oh, actually, this is very challenging. And there is a lot of work that goes into making data usable and effective. So I think that's kind of the view we see from a data side. The second perspective, and this is more from a business side, is our business stakeholders and business leaders better understanding their role when it comes to things like data stewardship. I think in many organizations that are earlier in their data maturity, they kind of just punt all of the decision making about data, about standards, about all of these elements to the data team. But the problem with that is, in many cases, the data team may not be the subject matter experts in those specific data elements. That's where we need, more of that business involvement in helping us understand what are those standards, or what is it actually being used for, and how do we best prioritize it? And so I think for our business teams, it gave them a better appreciation for the role that they play in it. and that this is more of a partnership. The data team doesn't own the data. In fact, nobody owns it, but we are stewards of it. And in many cases, our business teams are probably the better stewards in terms of defining, all the business language behind it.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's such an important part. I think so many people are concerned about governance, even more so now, probably as AI's come into prevalence and common usage. But something we definitely see, the more data literate, the more AI literate the workforce, the more engaged they are with your stewardship and ownership program. Because right now we typically ask people who don't understand data to referee it and care about it and all those types of things. Actually, the more they come on the journey, the more literate they become, the more understanding they have that, firstly, like you said earlier, this is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. If it was easy, everyone would do it, and that isn't the case. And secondly, that yeah, it needs to be governed effectively to get the value they want from it. Um, Got a couple of questions from Shireen at the University of Leeds in the UK. So big kind of traditional university in the UK or college in the UK. And I guess the theme of the two questions really is, how are you communicating the need to the senior team and even the senior data colleagues and senior IT colleagues to transition away from technology is the solution here, and actually there is a people solution? And are there any metrics or success measures that you've been tracking which have helped reinforce that conversation that this is no longer just about technology, it's about how we bring the people on the journey too? Anything that's kind of come to the fore there?
Yeah, from a the technology is the magic bullet. Uh, I think every organization, including ours, we have past technology that may have brought we may have brought in or may have used that just didn't really pan out the way we wanted it to. And so I think those types of examples are probably the best when it comes to showing that it's not just about the technology. People have to be able to effectively understand it and utilize it in their roles, or you're just going to have a very expensive solution. And so I think that was one of the ways, kind of looking at past technology implementations or past partnerships on where we may have missed the mark was where we didn't have the right buy-in internally. And then kind of conversely, where we have been very successful with technology, it has included just such a large culture component, and that has helped propel us to success. So that's, just from a technology standpoint, that's where we focused a lot on. When it comes to, showing the improvements year over year, we utilize benchmarking. And so there are a lot of different companies out there, Gartner, others, where you can do kind of very standardized benchmarking. That has been something that I can point to each year and show, okay, we've improved by X based on a very industry standard benchmark. That's a very important data point, showing our improvement and our evolution going forward, and something that we can always reference for our senior leaders and just for the organization in general. But that benchmarking is so important because I've been asked many times, where are we at in our data journey? How are we doing? I can definitely weigh in based on my experience, but that's not very data driven. And I want to make sure that I'm also modeling data driven behavior as well. And then I have, metrics or benchmarks that I can refer to.
Yeah, I love that. And Kadra has also asked a question about metrics, but I'm going to pull it back to one of the things we talked about in the conversation beforehand. And what was super exciting and has been super exciting about partnering with you on this program is that you referenced it earlier, Ylan, that it was so clearly tied to what Blue Cross Blue Shield North Dakota calls its ruthless priority for every year, and like the thing that matters the most to move the business forward. And previously that was data, and now it's a customer focus, and the link between those two things has been really powerful, right? How does data drive customer success and outcomes? So the question, I guess, is a combination of, firstly, why do you feel so many strategies, possibly elsewhere fail and fail to deliver against the strategic priorities of the organization? And which type of metrics, which is Kadra's question, did you use to identify the data literacy program's impact on the organization's goals? So that's probably where that customer ruthless priority comes together. So like
Mhm.
how do we think about those things, and how have you firstly avoided this program failing because it is so linked to strategy, and
Mhm.
secondly, how have you evidenced that with your colleagues in customer where it's been so important?
What I found with data strategy just in general is, and I've definitely been guilty of this in the past early on in my career. Um, when you create a data strategy, there's almost this tendency to do it in a very academic way. And so what I mean by that is, you'll kind of go off and you'll look and see, okay, what are the outcomes we're trying to get to? And there, in many cases, there are these hugely aspirational outcomes, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but almost where all of them are moonshots and it's going to be near impossible to hit all of them. So I think there's kind of setting the expectations just astronomically too high. I think the other piece of that is looking at all best in class technologies and just kind of creating that as a part of your technology strategy. And in many organizations, that's not a good approach because, like for us, we're not a technology company. So we shouldn't have the same tech stack as Google or as Amazon. We're also in healthcare, which is a very highly regulated industry as well. So you can't just kind of take what an Amazon or a Google or an Apple is doing and think it's going to work in your organization. Um, so I think for me, as I've approached data strategy, I have started off on, okay, what is the art of the possible? But then the second lens that I kind of layer in is what are the realities of the organization? Where are we at today? And what does the culture look like? And where do we want it to be? And I think, that culture piece is probably the most important part of getting your data strategy right and being successful, because regardless of what you create, your culture is really going to make or break it. And if you're not creating it based on the culture that you have or the culture you aspire to, you're not really going to go that far.
No,
Um, so I would say when it comes to the kind of the second part of that, the metrics, um, I think there's an evolution in what that looks like, because from a data strategy standpoint, even a data literacy standpoint, many of these skills are foundational in nature. And so initially it can be very hard to measure. So, a good example, good analogy to that would be if you were to come into an organization and ask them, what is the ROI on electricity within your organization? And, people start laughing and say, well, yeah, you can't really value that and all that. But if we went into, our headquarters and the power was out for the entire day, there's a huge economic impact to it. But you only realize that when it doesn't work. So I think from a foundational standpoint, there are going to be elements of this that enable the rest of the business to just do better in their roles. But then as you move forward, identifying those use cases where maybe in the past it took 4 months to go from an idea to an implementation, and now it only takes 2 months because you have higher quality data. You have employees that are more data literate. They're able to save time. They're able to be more efficient. And I think just, pulling out kind of a before and after, that has been very meaningful to us to really show, okay, here's what it looked like a year ago. Now here's what it looks like today. And oh, by the way, all of that time saved, we can focus our energies elsewhere to maybe other use cases that we just didn't have the time to do in the past.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I see with firstly my experience with BCBSND, but just more generally as well, is how much the feedback loop from the business improves, and the access you get to problems that you would never have found out about otherwise. And I think we've got some really good examples of that right now. I think um, we've obviously not done this with Blue Cross yet, but we have with other clients and rolled out our kind of on-demand platform, our self-serve learning platform. Because to answer one of the questions in the chat about your rollout, I won't take up the whole question, but obviously it's been very kind of live learning focused, live online classrooms, some in-person classrooms for the execs and that type of thing. But the on-demand platform, we've now got a use case capture solution within there. And we've got like thousands and thousands of use cases coming in from across our client businesses now that can be part of that feedback loop to the problems that you can solve. And I think the more data literate, the more AI literate the business gets, the more that feedback loop is strengthened, where they're seeing their business problems as data problems. They might not be able to solve them themselves because often that is the job of the data professional, but the fact they actually bring them to you now is usually a massive win from the program as well. And even going back to those exec workshops I did with your senior colleagues, that started to happen in real time in that moment, where it's like, oh, we've actually got this going on. I should probably be speaking to Ylan's team about it. So that's super cool. I'm now going to combine again one of the questions that's in the chat from the audience with something that we'd already talked about. But so you are big into AI, and who isn't big into AI these days? I suppose for data professionals is the question. But there's definitely a link in our eyes between data confidence, data literacy, AI literacy, and AI readiness. Someone in the chat has asked the question, there's been lots of talks about AI. What opportunity or challenges is this presenting? How are people adapting to it? We'd obviously talked about this idea of AI readiness for AI initiatives through the people. But how are you seeing AI readiness as part of the value of data literacy and AI literacy and data confidence and culture more widely?
The way that I see it is data literacy is a foundational component of AI literacy and just AI understanding in general. I also think too that within our organization, we're embedding this as a part of our core culture. So it is this mindset of, things are going to continue to change and probably even more rapidly than any of us can anticipate. And that is the new normal. So ensuring that, a year from now, 2 years from now, we all realize that even our roles are going to continue to adapt and they're going to continue to change, and that's not a bad thing. So I see that as really the kind of the core piece of it. I think the other parts is that it helps our employees in particular just ask the questions. So something, obviously generative AI is huge right now, but something as simple as how does it actually do what it does, right? And it sounds like a very easy question, but it's actually a very complicated answer. And there are various technical ways of answering it that probably aren't very helpful to most employees. But I think just explaining things simply, whereas, in this case, you don't want to go into a Copilot or into a chat GPT and ask it for ground truth. That's probably not the best usage of it because it's essentially using probability, to generate each word in the prompt answer that it's giving you, right? So I think just little things like that also help our employees better utilize the technology appropriately and ensure that, in particular with generative AI, that they're not using it for any type of decision making, that they're using their own critical thinking, and that, a Gen AI solution can help inform, but it should never be making any type of business decision without some human in the loop. So I think it's really going to help organizations from a strategic lens. I think it will also help them from a risk and compliance lens as well. If you have employees that are very highly data literate and AI literate, they're going to be able to protect your data much better, especially if it's sensitive, and they're just going to make more improved business decisions, which will also reduce overall risk for an organization.
100%. I think it's very difficult when you work in a business that's data literacy by name, but I always say like we are a very data literate business. That's kind of by design. We obviously work a lot with our employees, but the thing that gives me as CEO a level of risk assurance with is that 99 times out of 100, because they are data and now AI literate, they'll make the right choice about what they do with our information. And that's more the stick side of things, but I know, like, for instance, they're not going to be putting any of our IP into an open version of ChatGPT. Firstly,
Hmm.
we have our internal versions of ChatGPT and Gemini, which they can use, so that facilitates them doing things the right way, and that's always a key enabler. But also, they know the risks of that, and they know that they shouldn't be doing it, therefore they don't. And that, I think, is a massive part of the AI readiness piece that comes from having a more than, I guess, an above standard data literacy and AI literacy within the business. So yeah, super interesting that you're seeing that too. Um, I think I'll come back to this. I'll end with this question, and then come back to one of the questions in the chat. And obviously, if anyone's got any last minute questions they want to ask, then get them in there, because I'll shoot into the Q&A fully in a second. Um, have you got any advice for other data leaders that are trying to do something similar and make this successful alongside their technology and their AI and their process and automation strategies?
Yeah, I kind of tongue in cheek, you have to have a very high pain tolerance. I'll maybe start there. You have to have a good degree of grit because I don't want people to think that as we were going through this journey, it was just smooth sailing the entire time. We ran into our own, hurdles, plateaus, had to course correct, and that's going to be a part of the journey. Whatever you have on paper, it's probably not going to look like that 100% when you're further through. So I think that's very important. I think the other piece too, and especially for more senior level data leaders, is you probably initially got to the role because you were very data and technically savvy, but it becomes so much more about your leadership skills and being able to inspire people and build strong relationships that will keep you moving forward. I mean, even today, I don't go into systems. I don't really use them anymore. And would I like to? Well, absolutely. I mean, that's what kind of brought me here. But I find that my time is much better spent on building the right culture, fostering the right relationships, and in showing how data can drive business value. And I think that, where I've seen, data leaders either fall short or run into challenges is when they get too technically focused. In particular, when they're communicating with, senior level audiences, and they're just, they're talking in almost like technobabble. They're not explaining things very simply. They're not kind of showing how does it relate back to the strategy. So I think that it's very important, but in many cases, it's almost counterintuitive because many of us did not get there doing that.
Absolutely agree. And I have some very strong opinions on the best ways that data leaders can use the time they get with the execs. And I think one thing that I can say is that you've done it really, really well through the course of this program. So some questions from the room then, and this one's quite a literal question, but number one, what's been the makeup of your rollout so far, and what's the plan for the future? You mentioned you've done some horizontal groups, I think, but what else have you done? And then number two from that same person is what's been the biggest enabler of the success you've had so far?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of our rollout, we knew that the first probably piece of it was going to be a little bumpy along the way. And so we didn't want to just kind of go all in and move forward. What we did is more of a pilot group to start. So a smaller pilot group, really a cross section of individuals across our organization. And we did that very deliberately because as we went through the pilot training, we identified what were the hurdles that came up. What could we have done? What could we have done better? And we took all of those learnings for when we had, kind of our second cohort that was much larger in nature, and that helped it to be a lot more successful. So I think I would just really encourage, starting, but maybe starting small, ironing out all the kinks and bumps that may come up so that when you do roll it out more broadly, you're ready to go. You have pretty much everything buttoned up and you're not going to run into any major challenges. I think as we look forward, one of the big pieces has been looking at how do we enable this for all of our employees within the organization. And I think, you'd mentioned the on-demand platform, there are other things that we're looking at as well on how do we do that. I think the other thing, and something that we're also doing internally, is creating a community of practice. And I think this is important because we don't want to lose the momentum that we've seen so far. And at the end of the day, we want to, really kind of add this to our core culture, where everybody is going to be on board. And so you have to have, you really have to have kind of that internally led component of it, with the right people, with the right business leaders. So it's not just the data team having to roll this out, but you have that right level of support.
Yeah, I think by far the biggest enabler of success for this program has been firstly your ability to engage the exec and get them on board, and then most importantly, and I think this is something that's been really powerful with your program, because obviously I've been very, very directly involved in it, versus some of the other places that we work, where actually on a recurring basis you have the support of the exec to keep coming back to them in short bursts and saying, this is why it's working, this is success we're seeing, this is how things are changing. And I think I'm always of the mindset that I would love it if everybody was willing to give us the kind of partnership with the exec that you have. And I think that is the thing that has kept this working so well, that you constantly, they're part of the feedback loop and they're constantly kept up to speed with the success. And I think that's really, really good the way that you've done that. And then I've got two more questions. So, is there anything you wish you'd started sooner?
Um, probably in every data leader role that I've had, I feel like we, as a data team, we almost like over communicate, but it's never enough. And I don't know what it is. Sometimes you can feel like a broken record, but I had a mentor tell me one time, as you're doing transformation and change, when you start to feel like you're a broken record as a leader, that is just when an organization is starting to pick up on what you're setting down. And I've really taken that to heart, where yes, I may be talking about it day in and day out, or with many of my team members or with the organization. But if you're an employee in one of our divisions, how many times have you actually heard the message? It may have only been once a month, twice a month, even though that same month, me personally, I may have messaged it, 100 times, 200 times. So I don't think you can ever over communicate. And I've kind of tested that out in many of the roles that I've had. I've never had somebody email me and say, you know what, I don't need all these emails. I don't need, another meeting about how to understand this. I've never ever received any feedback like that. So that just tells me that there's still probably areas where even I can improve upon how I communicate and the venues that I communicate in. But I think it's very important, as data leaders, this is kind of like data 101 to us. But I think to many in an organization, depending on where your organization is at, it can feel like a, advanced graduate level course to them,
Yeah,
based on their perspective. So just kind of understanding where they're at is just as important.
100%. I think it's kind of marketing and comms 101, right? It's like there aren't many people in the like Western middle class world who have never paid Nike for a pair of trainers, as an example. Yet Nike still slam you with messaging every single day to make sure you buy the next pair of trainers and that you pick them the next time you go on a run. And that's just the same thing. And data leaders, I think, really struggle to get round that idea that it is just a constant, never-ending kind of back. It should become the white noise that goes through the organization every day, that we're saying it again, this has been successful, this is working, here's value we've delivered, because saying it once is never going to be enough. And that's a great point. Um, and I think you've just given one of the tips, but so we can take it that you're asking for two tips here. But can you give three tangible tips you think will help any organization build their data literacy? Constant and recurring comms and a real passion for that is definitely one of those. So a couple of other tips that can
Mhm.
really help organizations build their data literacy.
Uh, Yeah, I would say the second one would be an organization has to first recognize where they are at. and how they want to improve. I think if there isn't that recognition that there is a challenge around data literacy or there is a challenge around outcomes, it's very difficult to kind of offer up data literacy as, a component of what that solution looks like. And I think, in our case, there had already been that recognition for the most part, but I've been part of other organizations where, you have to convince them, you have to show them evidence of that before there is that realization. So I think that's very important. And then I would just say radical transparency. I don't know how else to say it. Um, you know, when we were going about with our entire data journey, I found that a big part of what has helped it be successful is being very open and honest about what my team does specifically well and what we don't do well. And I think just kind of leading with that candor, it makes people a lot more comfortable and you form much stronger relationships because you're not trying to be a superhero. You're showing exactly what is going on. You're showing that, your team also has vulnerabilities or opportunities, but that you're working on them. And that's been very helpful, especially when in kind of the tougher conversations, if your team doesn't deliver or they're, maybe they miss a deadline. I'm the first person that says, you know what, we screwed up. Here's how we're going to correct it going forward. Here's how we're not going to repeat it versus trying to, blame it on something or blame it on someone. That's just not really going to work. And it's not a very good way to lead a team.
Not unsurprisingly, the answer isn't technology and just technology and throw more technology at them. So that's always reassuring to hear. Ylan, thank you so much for the nearly hour has absolutely flown by in my mind. And it just goes without saying, firstly, I'm really proud to be partnered with you on what I think is one of the best data literacy programs that we've been a part of and is probably out there in the world as a result. And it has come down to your ability to champion, to get the exec on board, keep them involved, make sure that your team are willing to work in a humble way and create safe spaces for their colleagues. And those are conditions that, if you can meet them, become a brilliant foundation for any program. And I think we've heard a lot of very, 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 very valuable stuff today, but it's also just amazing to work with someone who really does understand why this is so important. So I'm sure this has all been very valuable for the audience too. Thank you everyone else for joining. Of course, if anyone else wants to talk about data and AI literacy with us, you can go to the website. There's a contact us button there that you can use to have a more one-to-one conversation with us. If that's not where you are in your journey right now, absolutely fine. Stay engaged with the webinars, the newsletters, all those types of things. And I'm sure the time will come where this is the right step for you. So absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again in future.